Okay, so got some questions here. First question, I'd like to know what are your thoughts on transhumanism as it is today? Would you consider yourself to be a part of it? Why or why not? Yeah, I think transhumanism is an interesting concept. The philosophical definition that I like is it's an international movement to fundamentally change the human condition. And what exactly that means and the methodology used to do that is still up for grabs. And um, I think it's important that it not be so narrowly defined. The idea is that we, the idea of transhumanism is that we try to constantly improve our lives and our lot in life, and I think that's a good goal, no matter you know what kind of ethereal type of associations people might have with it. It's a very down to earth goal and philosophy. So I like it. I would consider myself to be a part of it. I think any human being is actually a part of it, whether they know that or not. Everybody's searching for improvement, and whether that's just kind of incremental improvement in their own lives or societal improvement in general, big lofty goals or personal goals. It's all improvement, and if you can improve, just one life, it's worth it. Question two, what uses do you think biohacking could have in corporations? I mean, companies specifically searching for technology in order to improve their employees' performance, skills, and other things. Do you already see this happening somewhere right now? And what could be a problem within mass implants in this case? Well, I think that there's already the idea of biohacking is already in corporations, and right now it's kind of on more of the life hacking side of things. So like a lot of companies offer gym memberships, and like they want to keep their employees healthy. They want to keep them active. An active, well-rested employee is a productive employee, and so they're already employing this kind of methodology to improve employee performance. But if you're talking about like surgical enhancements and things where it gets kind of extreme, I think the issue would be if you take like firefighters, right? They have a minimum requirement. You have to be able to run up the stairs, carry these hoses, do these kind of exercises, and pass this performance test to be able to be a firefighter. And so there was a lot of arguments about height requirements and all this. Basically, right out of the gate, early on, like no women were involved in firefighting, and there was a really high bar of discrimination set against that. It's just like, no, you're not going to be a firefighter. So, and same thing with women in the military and all that. But as things changed and we started to set just standards, like you must achieve this standard of performance, and if you happen to be a woman and you can perform in this standard, then so be it. So what I see happening in corporations is there being this standard set that's of performance of a particular type, whether it be physical, mechanical, kinesiology, or mental cognitive performance. There needs to be a standard, and so there might be a day coming where a company sets a standard that's basically impossible to achieve without some sort of augmentation. And then the company is not outright saying you must get an implant to be able to work here, but they might be setting a standard that's so high that it just doesn't make sense for an unaugmented human to be able to even attempt it. So I do see that coming. It might not be for another 100, 200 years, maybe, or it could be in the next 20. It just depends on how quickly things move. But Elon Musk just mentioned, that for humans to maintain relevancy, we need to merge with our machines in a tighter, more efficient way, and I think that will be true. So it's kind of an interesting problem. But on the other hand, I think it might be also interesting to see how society deals with that. Right now, if the question becomes have and have nots. Like, not just would you want to get an augmentation, what are the risks, and why would you risk that to be able to, why impose additional risks just to participate in society? And that's one issue. But the other issue is the haves and have-nots, and I think that that is not really an actual issue. The adoption rate of new technologies is dropping so fast that, unlike electricity that was introduced and took 100 years just about for ubiquity, smartphones came out and they were almost ubiquitous overnight. So the lowering of cost of technology and the rapid adoption, those things are happening now. So what I see is in the future, like these actual things being like supplied through social programs. Hold on, there's some noise out there. Anyway, so for example, right now, if you have low income, you can get a smartphone, relatively simple smartphone, but still a smartphone and service and connectivity for either free or vastly reduced cost. You can go to a library and use the internet. Anybody can for free. So there's these services, digital services that are being made available to low-income households that are through social programs. So you might see human augmentation follow the same route, where enough of society has been augmented that it becomes a deficiency to be unaugmented, and you are allowed or offered, the government implant. Like you can have the government subsidized implant, or you can have the Ferrari implant based on your income, but essentially they perform the same service. So you can get a cheap car for $500 and drive it down the road, or you can drive a Ferrari down the road, but you're still driving down the same road, and you still get to your place that you need to get to. So I think the idea of have and have-nots is not really an issue any more than it is today with anything that you might need to buy or use. I mean, public transit versus buying your own car. I mean, you can still get to your job with public transit just fine. So I don't think it'll be an issue. Okay. What about the impact of biohacking and transhumanism on the job market in general? Let's say someone who had biohacked themselves could get an advantage at a job. Wouldn't that be a problem if people felt they had to do this in order to be able to compete? And what jobs do you imagine would demand necessarily some sort of biohacking? I mean, I just kind of answered that question. But essentially, yeah, like in the job market, we already have these augmentations that we do. People have, diet regimens and sleep regimens, and some now are looking into nootropics for cognitive enhancement. But just the simple idea of coffee is already an augmentation. Like people, it's so ingrained into performance. Like I need coffee to wake up, then I can do my job. But it is an enhancement of sorts. I mean, what if certain people didn't have coffee? It seems ridiculous now because coffee is cheap and ubiquitous. But I think the same thing will happen with augments over time. Like whether they be nootropic, chemical, or implant bionics, or even genetic augmentations to help with cognition or strength or whatever. I mean, these things are going to happen. It's just the logical aspect of how is that different from today. People augmenting their own performance for work. It might just be a more fundamental augmentation, but it's still the same thing that we're doing today, just a different scale. Okay, next question. In how many years do you think that this is going to take to be more common reality? Could you describe me, imagine a world embracing biohacking in the future? What would the best scenario and worst case scenario be? Well, I think that it won't be called biohacking because it will be commonplace. It'll just be what people do, augmentation. It's called a hack now because it's uncommon. So the definition of hack, it's not a negative term or a derogatory term. It's just the definition I like is a hack is an unconventional approach to solving a problem or achieving a goal. So a good hack, an efficient hack that's actually worthwhile and works well becomes mainstream, then it's no longer a hack, it's conventional. The hack is further out on the envelope, it's pushing other edges. And so, a society that embraces what we call biohacking today and human augmentation will just be society. It's the same thing as the transition from horses to cars. People were freaked out by that, and but now we don't. They're just part of society. They're just part of globally. Pretty much everywhere. It's have some form of engine, whether it's combustion or electric or whatever, is moving people around and ultimately changing society as a matter of course. So I think that there's going to be pros and cons, of course, for society. I mean, people argued that the phonograph would destroy the family unit, going out on the porch and singing, and it did that. But it also brought amazing artistry and music and even just just a history, recording just mundane history onto photographic records, and that brought that into homes that did not have access to it previously. So it changes. There are pros and cons to everything, and I think the pro is going to be that we have a more firm grasp and control over our personal evolution. Whereas evolution now takes multiple generations, where mutations happen, and you hope that there's a good mutation and it's beneficial for your current environment, and that reduces your selective processes, either natural or artificial. Now, the idea being that you can augment yourself both with software, hardware, and genetic augmentations within your own lifespan. So you're evolving your set programming, which is new. That's a new type of evolution. There's no bones about it. I mean, the old way of doing it is, make offspring and die and hope the offspring carry along a positive mutation. That doesn't really do anything for me. That just helps humanity in general. But now we can do both, and I think that's going to be the ultimate pro. On the con side, people are going to do crazy stuff. They always do. Any kind of technology is going to be leveraged for all kinds of purposes. So there's going to be hugely vain people that make like super babies, that are all genetically identical maybe, or like very close, and there might be some kind of plague that wipes people out because there's a lack of diversity. So who knows? I mean, to try to prognosticate and look into the future of humans is folly. I think it's you try to just make the best future you can today, and that's the best you can do. All right. Next question. How's your experience with dangerous things? Could you tell me a bit about the feedback you get from your clients? What do you feel that is normally behind the desire to start biohacking among your clients? What are your next goals and projects? Okay. So dangerous things was a response to the maker movement that started up again in 2008, 9. So 2005, I put this in here. It's still there. It's been there 12 years now. And at that time, it was really unheard of, and the reactions were quite visceral. What are you doing? You're a freak. This is crazy. This is the devil's work, or the government, or who would want to do that? You're nuts. Now, over time, people started getting into making things again, and building things in their garage, and hobbyist electronics, and kind of like exploring technology. And so we started Dangerous Things in 2013, end of 2012, early 2013, and the initial clients were very technically minded. They wanted to know where the data sheet was and tell me about the data, the transmission protocols, and all of that. But very quickly, over the course of a couple of years, the client changed to a more general interest from the public. So now it's on par with, a person might say, "Hey, I'm going to get a tattoo, or maybe I'll get a piercing, or I could get this implant thing that does like cool stuff with my door, and I could start my car, stuff like that." So it's the questions now from the clients are, what can I do with it? Hey, can I use it with this thing over here? And they might not be so technically inclined, but they see it as something interesting and cool, and they want to be a part of it. So I think society is at the point where we're starting to be much more accepting of the idea of human augmentation and very simple surgical procedure. I mean, it's actually safer than an ear piercing. Both the installation and the healing process is much safer than a regular body piercing. So, but we're at the point now where society is starting to accept this idea, and human augmentation with bionic devices is going to become more prevalent. Most people don't, they don't see that, they don't think I'm going to get into biohacking. They just see this thing and like, cool that, people are doing awesome stuff with this thing that they put in their hand, and it's like getting a piercing at worst. So, I think it's very interesting to see that shift and start looking at new opportunities for things that aren't too crazy. So, next goals and projects, we're working on VivoKey, which is vivokey.com, has some information about it, but it's all about kind of moving beyond just a simple identifier to like a door or something, but moving to cryptography, like full cryptography, generating two-factor authentication tokens, being able to secure your data with an encryption key, being able to process Bitcoin transactions in the body, being able to do payments like on transit transactions. So being able to more securely and beneficially link your biological identity to your digital identity, or identities that together represent you online and with various digital devices. So that's our current project that we're working on. Last question here. Looking for examples of companies that embrace transhumanism somehow. If you have any recommendations, I'd be grateful. There's a company in Sweden called Epicenter, and they, like, majority of their employees got implants to be able to use various devices around the office, get through doors. That's part of a growing number of companies that are interested. There's been a few others. You can probably Google them. Employees get implants, kind of thing. And the idea being that as a company, they want to empower, introduce the idea to their employees, empower them to take advantage of these things. And so it's actually pretty interesting because in the States, in the United States, there's a couple states that have passed these laws that are basically anti-chipping laws, where they say an employer can't force an employee to get an implant, which I agree with. Shouldn't be a forced thing. But they also went beyond that and said an employer cannot incentivize an employee to get one. And I thought that goes completely against fair market, open market concepts that the conservatives that sponsored these bills claim to support. So the free market is, it's okay when it's benefiting them, but when they want to, they just turn that off. So the idea is that if an employer says, hey, we'll cover the cost of the implant if you want to get one, you don't have to, but we'll cover the cost. That's an incentive and technically illegal in those states, and that's just ridiculous. That's just backward thinking, and it's detrimental, I think, to the idea that a person owns their body, they can do what they want with it, and this kind of very simple, very safe elective upgrade to be condemned so harshly that a law has to be passed to make it illegal seems a bit extreme. So we'll see what happens, but I think probably companies in locations like the EU or outside of the US are probably going to be more interested in this, and we'll see these types of things crop up sooner in other geographies other than the United States. So that's it for the questions, and email me if you have any others. All right.